James Walker sat in his modest, old-fashioned chair in his private school dorm room, clutching a photograph. It was of his mother, young and smiling, her eyes full of hope. She was his world, his inspiration, his everything. She had died when James was a teenager, but everything he had done in his life had been for her. He knew that if she had lived, she would have been proud of him. He looked out the window at the dark evening New York, the bright lights of the city that seemed so far away and unattainable. A city where dreams come true, but also where it is impossible to survive if you do not have the right connections, money, and status. He took a deep breath and looked at his desk, which was covered in books, notes, plans, and diagrams. He knew that if he wanted to break out of his past, he needed more than just knowledge. He had to be someone important, and that meant one thing: being at the top. The top where only the elite were. And if this school was about teaching him to be better than his classmates, he was willing to do anything. His path to this school was difficult and long. He was one of the few who received a scholarship for exceptional academic and athletic achievements. But his entire life was a constant struggle, a fight with the environment, with society, with himself. He remembered his house, abandoned and dirty, where he lived with his mother, the walls that were cracking from damp, the old furniture that they had painstakingly assembled themselves. He could not forget the years of poverty, when his only consolation was to look at the city through the window, dreaming of something more. "I have to be better than all of them," he told himself out loud. He couldn't afford to lose himself. School was his only chance to get out of what he called home. His goal was clear: to be successful, to be someone important, someone worthy of respect. James looked at the picture of his mother again. He always kept it close to him, as a reminder that he had to win, that he had to be better than his family and friends ever thought he would be. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Kyle, his roommate. He was one of those kids who came from rich families, with gold cards and connections that opened doors to the best places. "Hey James, how are you?" Kyle looked as cheerful as ever. "It's okay," James replied, pushing aside his thoughts about his mother and life in a tough neighborhood. "Well, I went to the club with Elizabeth and the others. Are you coming?" Kyle grinned cheerfully. James thought about it. He knew these parties weren't for him. He wasn't like them. Their conversations about yachts, holidays, and fashion brands were empty and uninteresting, but at the same time, he knew he couldn't afford to become a hermit at this school. "Probably not today," he replied. "I have things to do." Kyle shrugged and walked away, and James looked back at his books and plans. He needed to focus. He hadn't come to this school to have fun. His goal was to be a part of this world, and his time on that path was just beginning. James woke up this morning with a feeling of unease in his chest. He knew that today he would be meeting Gregory Simons. Gregory was not just a graduate of this school, he was the embodiment of success. His name was on everyone's lips who were somehow connected with the city's elite. He was an example of what James aspired to be. But James knew that Gregory was not just a philanthropist and a successful businessman. There was something more hidden behind this facade, something that James could not yet understand, but intuitively felt. When he entered the auditorium, Gregory was already standing by the window, looking out over the city. He was tall, with a confident look, and the manner of a man who was used to being obeyed. His appearance radiated power and authority, and James felt that not only physical, but also invisible boundaries were being set before him. "Good morning, James," Gregory said, turning and offering his hand. "How are you? How are you getting on in this school?" James cringed, but there was no doubt or hesitation in his answer. "It's okay, sir. I'm working on it." Gregory grinned, as if he knew something in advance. He was a man who did not believe in coincidences. You want to be successful, James, and I see potential in you. But you know that the path to success is not as easy as you think. In this world, money talks. The people you call your comrades play by different rules, and you need to learn to play by those rules if you want to survive. James felt his shoulders tense. He knew Gregory was telling the truth, but it sounded so cruel. "What do you suggest?" James asked, not hiding his curiosity. This was a moment that could become a turning point in his life. "I'm offering you an opportunity. I can give you a job in one of my companies. But keep in mind, James, this isn't just a job. This is a chance to enter a world where it's not just your abilities that count, but your ability to manipulate. A world where everyone is on a pedestal, and you must learn to exploit their weaknesses." James felt his heart speed up. On one hand, he wanted to turn away, to feel disgust. But on the other hand, this was a chance he couldn't miss. His dream of being successful didn't give him the right to refuse. "I'm ready," he said, not even realizing the full weight of his choice. Gregory smiled, and there was deep confidence hidden in his gaze. "I knew you wouldn't let me down. Tomorrow morning is your first day on the job." Several months passed, and despite all his efforts, James continued to encounter setbacks. Working at Gregory Simon's turned out to be much more difficult than he had expected. He began to understand that in the business world, it was not only the ability to work with numbers and projects that was important, but also a keen sense of who could be used and who could be thrown away. At school, the situation was no less tense. James continued to feel like an outsider, despite the fact that, thanks to his efforts, ambitions, and scholarship, he was among the best. However, all his successes, all his efforts seemed of little value in the eyes of those around him. This was especially evident at parties and events organized by the school, where he met the children of rich and influential people. One day, at such a party, James bumped into Elizabeth, the daughter of one of the biggest investors in town. She was beautiful, confident, and, like everyone else, didn't take him seriously. She approached him with a smile, not hiding her arrogance. "James, did you come after all? I thought you'd have more important things to spend your time on than these school parties." Elizabeth looked at him with a hint of mockery. "Even if you get a job with Gregory, you're still not one of our circle." Her words hit him like a knife in the back. He had expected such a relationship, of course, but he had not been prepared for such direct disregard. She was part of the world James was trying to get into, and it was painful to realize. "I'm here to learn," he said, trying to remain calm even though his inner world was already falling apart. "I don't need to be like you." Elizabeth laughed. "You can't be anyone else, James. You can improve your looks and your manners, but inside, everything will remain the same. You can't become one of us because you lie to yourself too much." Her words echoed in James's head as he tried to figure out why they hurt him so much. Was it because they were true? Was it because he knew deep down that he would never truly fit into their world? The evening was unbearably hard for a long time. He couldn't wait to leave, and returning to his room was his salvation. He needed silence, to feel again that he was not losing himself. But that evening, the silence brought no relief. He was left alone with a feeling of emptiness. What should he do? All these meetings, all these conversations. For what? And who was he really? The next day, James went to Gregory's office looking for an answer. He hoped his mentor would help him sort out his feelings. Gregory was sitting at his massive desk, a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked up as James walked in. "What happened?" Gregory asked, his gaze sliding over his face. He knew James well enough to see that he was out of sorts. "I'm not sure I can go on like this," James said, looking at him, his inner struggle evident. "This isn't the world I thought I could be in." Gregory put his cup down on the table and looked at him carefully. "You thought you could just walk into this world and be successful? This isn't a movie, James. This is reality. There's no room for the weak here. Things are resolved differently, and you know it. The question is, do you want to be a part of this world, even though it's not what you imagined?" James felt his doubts deepen. Gregory was right. This was not the path he had envisioned. He had expected something different. He didn't want to be a part of it, but he didn't know how to say no. "If you want to change your life, you have to be willing to compromise," Gregory continued, watching his reaction. "Compromise with yourself, with your principles, with what you thought was important." James was silent. He knew Gregory was right. He knew that in this world where everything was bought and sold, it was impossible to remain pure and innocent. But what if he lost himself? What if he never got back to who he was? Gregory stood up and walked over to him, placing his hand on his shoulder. "You think too much, James. It's time to act. Or do you want to go home? There's no one waiting for you at home." The words hit him deeper than he expected. Home. His neighborhood. Where he grew up. Where he was a nobody, but still felt like he was part of something bigger than just surviving. But now he had a choice. There was no turning back. James returned to his room with the feeling that his life was just beginning, and that the choices he made would determine his future. He didn't know what to do, but he knew that every decision had consequences, and they might not be the ones he wanted. He looked in the mirror. In front of him was a man who might be losing his soul to achieve a goal, but he couldn't stop. Several weeks had passed since James had made the decision that would change his life completely. His work duties at Gregory's company were becoming increasingly complex, but at the same time, he felt the world he had entered was gradually becoming his home. Gregory continued to mentor him, to guide him in this new world where human relationships, like everything else, could be used as a tool to achieve goals. But with each new project, James felt himself increasingly losing himself. At first, he had welcomed the opportunity to prove himself, but now, faced with constant pressure, he began to realize that the principles he had so carefully built were beginning to crumble. Gregory was not inclined to do favors. There was room in this world only for those who were willing to make sacrifices and make tough decisions. One day, during a company party, James ran into Elizabeth again. She looked as if everything was spinning around her, and she alone was the center of the world. She noticed him from a distance, and approaching, gave him her exquisite and, as always, haughty smile. "Are you still here, James?" she asked ironically. "I thought you'd gone off into the world of business and finance by now." James, despite his internal struggles, smiled back, although deep down he felt that her words were hurting him again. "You know, I'm getting used to it," he replied. "It's not easy to find your place among people like you." Elizabeth snorted and seemed to notice the change in his behavior only now. "You've changed, James," she said, raising an eyebrow slightly. "You're no longer interested in my world. You're trying to get into a more serious one, aren't you? I've seen how you behave at meetings with Gregory. You've already become part of this world. All you have to do is give up your last illusions." Her words went straight to James's heart. He felt his inner conflict flare up again. He tried not to think about it, but he couldn't shake the feeling that Elizabeth was right. He was becoming what he had been trying to escape for so long. But what choice did he have? When he returned home, his thoughts returned to Gregory. He was always sure of his actions. James often wondered why this world was so cruel. Why did they have to hide their true intentions? Manipulate, use others to survive. The next day, during another meeting with Gregory, James couldn't take it anymore. "Tell me, Gregory," he began, unable to keep the question to himself any longer. "This world, do you really think it's worth it? Are we just victims of circumstance, doing what we're forced to do to survive?" Gregory looked at him with slight surprise, then grinned. "James, you are still too naive. You see the world as a teenager who has just come into this cruel world of adults. This is not the place to complain. You have to learn to play by these rules. You like to think that there is another way, a cleaner one, but it is an illusion. We are all playing this game, and the only thing that matters is to win. Don't worry about what you need to do to win. You just need to focus on how to become a part of this world." Every word Gregory said cut through all his doubts. James understood that this world is not for dreamers, not for those who rely on ideals. Here, only those who are ready to become tough, manipulative, who can put goals above all else. At that moment, he realized he couldn't just give up. He had no right to be weak. Everything he had dreamed of was now connected to the fact that he had to overcome his inner barriers. But the question remained: how much was he willing to sacrifice to succeed? And was he asking himself that question too late? With each passing day, James felt his soul and conscience being destroyed. He became more confident in his actions, but behind this, there were more and more compromises. He used his classmates for his own benefit, manipulated his friends and acquaintances to speed up his career. And all this gave results. He achieved his goals, but his successes did not bring the satisfaction he expected. One day, when he found himself in Gregory's company, he finally opened his eyes to reality. "You think we're building something, James?" Gregory said, looking at him with cold determination. "We're not building anything. We've only destroyed other worlds to create our own. The world you live in now has no place for the weak. And if you want to survive, you'll have to learn not just to fight, but to kill everything human inside you." James felt his inner world crumbling again. Gregory's words sank deep. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew that maybe it was the only truth. Meanwhile, at school, James encountered Elizabeth more and more often. She continued to build her own reality around herself. But there was something new in her gaze, something that was alarming. He realized that she was not just a victim of circumstances, but rather someone who skillfully manipulated others, hiding her true motives. He couldn't figure out where his own struggle ended and the struggle with this world began. And was this world even what he wanted to build? James couldn't shake the feeling that he was at a crossroads. Everything inside his head was crossed, and he didn't know how to move forward. He had become the man he once despised. In all those months he had spent in Gregory's company, he had learned to manipulate, sell himself, and even use others to achieve his goals. But the further he delved into this world, the more it became clear that he was losing what he once considered important. Things got heated when Gregory offered him a new deal. At one of the meetings, surrounded by high-profile investors, Gregory said, "You've come far, James. You've proven that you can be a part of this world. And now it's time to move on to the next level. We can offer you a partnership. But for that, you'll have to make a choice. Leave everything connected to your past behind and become a part of this game forever." Gregory continued, as if knowing that his words would awaken an internal conflict within James. "You must understand, James, that people like you do not come here by chance. You were chosen, and all you need is to take the final step. Are you ready? Or would you rather stay in your old world, in your worthless life where nothing will change?" These words made James feel his heart clench. He knew that this was the moment when all his efforts, all his suffering, all his achievements would be worth it. But what if the price for success was too high? What if this last step was something he could never recover from? His gaze drifted to the next table, where Elizabeth was sitting. She was watching him, a small smile on her face, as if this was all part of a premeditated game. Her eyes seemed to say, "You know what you need to do." Gregory interrupted his thoughts. "You don't think I'm just offering this to you, do you? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Together, we can change a lot, James. We have every opportunity. But you have to choose a side." James felt his hands begin to shake. His inner world was shaking like never before. He thought about his past, how he had grown up poor, how he had fought for every opportunity. But now that success was so close, he couldn't shake the feeling that it had cost his soul. Gregory's words echoed in his head. "You have to be willing to destroy everything to become who you want to be." This was his life, his future. He couldn't afford to go back to the old way. But was he willing to pay that price? The silence in the room was stifling. James could feel the tension growing with each passing second. His gaze met Elizabeth's again, and her expression showed interest. She watched him struggle with himself. She had already made her choice. She was part of this game, and she never doubted that she was right. "This is your chance, James," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Don't miss it." His inner conflict reached its climax. James closed his eyes, trying to imagine what his life would be like if he took this step. All that money, power, opportunity, it would all be his. But what would he lose? When he opened his eyes, his gaze was hard. He felt something dark awakening within him. The decision was made. "I agree," he said, his voice calm but determined. "I'm ready." Gregory nodded in satisfaction, and the entire room fell silent. James felt his life changing right before his eyes. Everything he had ever wanted was now a reality. But in that moment, while he was making his decision, he still couldn't shake the feeling of loss. He had become part of the game he had once dreamed of, but he knew that this game could take everything he had. And now, he couldn't turn back. Then, as he was leaving the meeting, James caught Gregory's eye, looking at him as if he were his new ally, as if he would no longer doubt. But there was something else in Gregory's eyes, more than just the satisfaction of victory. There was a warning. He knew that James would have to go through a lot before he realized what he had truly lost. As soon as the door closed behind him, James felt everything inside him change. He was on the threshold of a new world, but something inside him had changed forever. His step had become irreversible, and he knew that his life would never be the same again. Several months had passed since James had made the decision and become a full-fledged participant in the cruel world of business. He continued to work with Gregory, his ambitions growing, his successes becoming more and more significant. His name was becoming known in the right circles, and opportunities were opening up before him one after another. However, each new step brought not only the satisfaction of achieving goals, but also deep internal contradictions. He asked himself many times, what kind of choice was that? Was it worth giving up his soul for success? He began to notice that in his life, where there were so many victories, there was no room for real happiness. He became increasingly lonely and internally empty. From time to time, he was overcome by memories of how he used to live, when he did not yet know the value of his ambitions. He was not so tough, did not see the world through the same prism as now. James had more doubts about Gregory than ever. With each step in their partnership, his ambitions grew, but he also realized how cruel this world was. Gregory never spared anyone who fell into his orbit. James was becoming part of this game and didn't know how to get out. He often searched for an answer to a simple question. Why? Why does he need this success if he feels like he is losing himself every time? He learned to say the right words, make the right impression, manipulate others. But behind it all was a man who did not know how to return to his old life. Then he would think that he was a victim of this game, not a winner. He became more and more immersed in the bustle. There was no time for friends, for himself, for any worries except those related to work. The time that he could have previously devoted to his growth became time that he spent on satisfying other people's ambitions. But something changed when he met Elizabeth again. He met her by chance at one of the restaurants where high-profile clients often met. She was sitting at a table with several people who seemed to be influential figures from the business world. She saw him, and the same smirk that had once so irritated him flickered across her face. "Are you here again, James? I thought you were so caught up in your success by now," she said, raising an eyebrow. He couldn't help but notice how in her eyes he could read not only irony, but also something deeper, hidden discontent. "Yes, I'm here again. Still, I have my own path to follow," James replied, but his words were no longer as confident as before. Elizabeth looked at him carefully, and suddenly her gaze became more serious. "You've lost yourself, haven't you? This whole game with Gregory, your career, you know it won't bring you happiness. You'll lose what once motivated you," she said, a little more gently. James felt something inside him shift. The words brought him back to reality, to the moment when he was ready to give up everything he had ever held dear. Elizabeth had always been able to poke him in the weak spot, and now, when his world was crumbling, she had struck him again with her insight. "Do you really think this is all worth it?" she asked. "What will you get in the end? Power? Money? You stopped feeling anything real a long time ago." James couldn't answer. He just looked at her silently, trying to figure out what she wanted. But she didn't give him time to think. "You know yourself that you are no longer the person you were before. You have become part of this game, and you cannot get out of it. You have changed, James. But the question is, do you want all your efforts to bring you at least something meaningful?" And then, like a bolt from the blue, she uttered words that left him confused. "I heard that Gregory is ready to make you his deputy. This is the highest reward for you, right? But you understand that this is not just a new step in your career. This is the moment when you will finally lose your soul. You know that Gregory will not be your friend. He always uses people, and you will become just another tool in his game." The words were like a blow to the heart. James felt his world crumble even more. He knew Elizabeth was right. He had become part of a game he couldn't escape. And now his career didn't just depend on Gregory. It depended on how far he was willing to go in this world. He felt lost. All those months of hard work, sacrifices, every decision, every step, they all led him to the moment when he stood on the edge. And there was no turning back. But what was ahead? As soon as he got home from the meeting, all his inner feelings were overwhelmed. He sat alone, trying to decide what to do next. He knew that the decision he made would be decisive. Elizabeth's words echoed in his head. Gregory's advice echoed, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had become part of a script that he no longer controlled. James knew he had to make a decision, but what would he choose? What was he willing to lose? James sat in his office on the top floor of an office building, and the evening was falling outside. The light of city life was gradually fading, and the fire of inner struggle was growing brighter in his soul. He looked at the documents in front of him. The contracts he had signed over the past months, the agreements with Gregory and influential partners. All these papers were his achievement, but each time he leafed through them, his soul grew heavier. He felt like a toy in someone else's hands, like a game of chess where he had long since become a pawn. And this thought hurt him. He knew that all his efforts, his whole life was now connected to this world. A world where people trade not only money, but souls. This whole journey had led him to the final step, which, as it turned out, was not as easy as he thought. Today, Gregory offered him a deal again, which was supposed to finally consolidate his success and take him to a new level. He offered James to become not just a deputy, but his right hand. In exchange, James was supposed to take responsibility for several dubious business deals that, in fact, violated the law. "You know it's going to take a lot of work," Gregory said when they met in his office, "but I'm sure you want it. Are you ready to take on the responsibility, James?" That moment was crucial. James looked at Gregory and felt his inner world crumble. He knew that accepting this offer was not just a step forward. It was a step into an abyss from which there was no turning back. "Yes, I'm ready," he replied, feeling neither joy nor satisfaction. It was not a decision he wanted to make, but it was one he knew he needed. Gregory smiled with genuine confidence, and James felt the gesture vaguely reminiscent of a funeral procession. Everything he had known seemed an illusion now. He had found his purpose, but in the process he had lost what was important. And so, a few days later, when James signed the paperwork and officially became Gregory's right-hand man, his world changed again. He was no longer a student, no longer a man starting from scratch. He was part of a vast system that sometimes ruined the lives of others to get ahead. There was a void in his life that could not be filled with money, power, or respect. He was no longer a man who could return to his roots. All he had was external recognition, status, money. But inside, his heart remained empty. He met Elizabeth again, and her gaze spoke volumes. She did not question him, did not judge him. She simply looked at him with some sympathy, as if predicting that his life would not be what he dreamed of. "How are you feeling, James?" she asked, when they met in a cafe unlike any they had ever visited before. "I don't know," he answered honestly, though he sensed that there was more to the words than just an admission. It was an admission that he had lost something important. "You've achieved what you dreamed of. You've become part of a system you once hated," Elizabeth said, looking him in the eye. "But you're not that person anymore. You should think about whether you really want to stay that way. This is your last chance to change everything." His hands clenched into fists. He thought about his family, about how he had come to this place, about what he had lost. And now, as he stood at the pinnacle of success, his world seemed as empty as when he had started. "I don't know what to do," he said sadly. "I wanted this to bring me satisfaction, but I don't feel joy." Elizabeth was silent for a few seconds, and then she said the words that would stay with him forever. "When you give your whole soul, you always lose yourself. But you can still get your life back if you decide it's worth it." James was silent, his thoughts were chaotic. He knew that his actions had led to this moment, but he didn't know how to find a way out. A few days later, in the dead of night, as James sat in his office, pondering his life, he received a message from Gregory. It was simple, but short. "You are ready for the next step. Time is running out." The moment he realized that he now belonged to this world completely was the final nail in his coffin. He had lost himself. He had lost hope. And now, when he had achieved everything he had ever dreamed of, there was only emptiness before him. That same evening, he made a decision, but not the one he expected. He sent back a response, "I'm leaving." He knew this was his last chance to get out of this world before he finally became part of the system that would swallow him up forever. He knew he was losing everything he could have achieved, but maybe this was the only way to get himself back. With his final choice, James was not a winner, but a lost man trying to find meaning in the world he had created. But this time, he knew he still had a chance. Maybe that chance would come later. But for that, he had to take the first step. Tragic, but perhaps necessary.